Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Continuing and actually revising from our series, Portraits from the Lives of the Companions. Since we started the series, we've covered over 22 companions. We're now halfway through this series, this book, these volumes. And intermittently, we pause and we review the ones that we've studied already so that we can retain our knowledge and we're not just moved by the stories, but recollect them or at least portions of the stories so that we can reflect on it, teach other people. And so going back 5 or 6 companions, we talked about Adi ibn Hatim al-Ta'i radiallahu anhu, who was a king who accepted Islam during the 9th year of Hijrah, so very late in Islam. Adi ibn Hatim, he received a letter from the Prophet ﷺ because as we discussed, the Prophet ﷺ sent letters to the kings of the Arabs and the non-Arabs alike, inviting them to Islam. And some people reacted hostilely, some people reacted friendly, and various reactions in between. Adi ibn Hatim reacted with hostility towards Islam, and his kingdom was hostile towards the Muslims. And eventually, Islam grew by the 9th year of Hijrah to be a powerful, expanding force. And so Adi ibn Hatim, his dominion was under threat. And so he actually flees from the Muslims and he forgets and leaves behind his sister. And his sister is captured. And his sister tells to the Prophet ﷺ, هَلَكَ الْوَافِدْ هَلَكَ الْوَالِدْ وَغَابَ الْوَافِدْ, that, my father Hatim has passed away, and the one who's supposed to be responsible for me has fled, so let me go free. So the Prophet ﷺ not only sets her free, but he gives her a camel, gives her clothes, and gives her money for her trip, and sends her free, and she goes to now where her brother Adi ibn Hatim has fled. Of course, she's furious with him, but once they make amends, Adi ibn Hatim says to tell me about the Prophet ﷺ. And she says you should go to him quickly because he's either a prophet and going to a prophet quickly would be good for you, or he's a king, or he's going to be one of the great kings, and you as a king will not be humiliated before him. And so his task is to find out, is the Prophet ﷺ a prophet or a king? And so he sets out to Medina to meet the Prophet ﷺ, and he meets him in his masjid. The Prophet ﷺ is happy, he greets him, and he begins to walk with him to his house. And along the way, an old woman stops the Prophet ﷺ, and this old woman with her son or with a small child begins to complain to the Prophet ﷺ about something. And the Prophet ﷺ stood there, leaving the king waiting until he fulfilled the request, until he completed the need of the old lady. And to this, Adi ibn Hatim, this was the first sign to himself. He said, Wallahi, ma hadha bi amri malik. This is not how kings behave. This is not the affairs of a king. And then the Prophet ﷺ, when he reaches his house, he asks him and has conversation with him, and he says that, are you not Rukusiyan, which is a religion that is close to Christianity? It is a derivative of Christianity. And the king says, yes, I am. And he says, does your religion not prevent you from taking, do you not take a quarter of the spoils of war? Because Adi ibn Hatim, one of the reasons he was hesitant to accept Islam is because under his rule, anytime there was a victory in war, he would take 1/4 of all of the spoils of war. So the Prophet ﷺ calls him out for this. He says, isn't this forbidden in your religion? And we find many a times people follow a religion without actually following its commandments. And the Prophet ﷺ calls out this hypocrisy that you say you're Christian, you say you're this, but your book says this and you don't follow it. And so Adi ibn Hatim, at this point, he's convinced that the Prophet ﷺ is a messenger for knowing these specific details. So the Prophet ﷺ tells him, perhaps what prevents you from accepting Islam is that you see the Muslims are poor now, and you see the Muslims are weak now. And the Prophet ﷺ swears by Allah and tells them that a time will come that 3 things happen. Does anyone remember one of these 3 things? So one of the 3 things is that wealth will come. Wealth will be so great in the Muslim Ummah that there will be no one to receive charity. I want to give a shot at the second prophecy. The second thing he says is that a lone woman will be able to travel all the way from Al-Qadisiyah in Persia to Mecca, fearing nothing but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There won't be fear of enemies from that vast distance. And the third promise is, by Allah, a time will come where the palaces of Babel and the treasures of Kisra will become for the Muslims. So Adi ibn Hatim, he accepts Islam and he lives for a long time, and he witnesses 2 of these 3 prophecies. He says, by Allah, I have witnessed 2 out of the 3 of them, and by Allah, the third will come to be. Because if the Prophet ﷺ said it will happen, it will happen. He was one of the first people to see the treasures of Kisra come to the Muslims, and he said he saw a lone woman traveling from Al-Qadisiyah to Mecca without fearing anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And indeed, after he passed away, during the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, rahimahullah, the wealth bit came true. Debts And the wealth was so much in the Muslim Ummah that not only did they pay the zakat for everybody, there was extra money, and so he paid off everybody's debts. There was extra money, so he fulfilled everybody's needs. There was extra money, so he took that money to free slaves. There was extra money, so he took that money to get people married. There was that abundance of wealth in the Muslim Ummah under his time. The next companion was Abu Dhar al-Ghifari radiallahu anhu. Abu Dhar was from the tribe of Ghifar, and his tribe was more or less highway bandits. They were living along one of the trade routes of the Meccans, and they would make their living by basically extracting goods by force or purchasing them by force from the Meccans passing by. So Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, he detested this lifestyle, and he hated and detested the worship of idols too. He was spiritually discontent. And so when he heard that the Prophet ﷺ came to Mecca, he sent his brother to find out about the Prophet ﷺ, and then he went himself. He sleeps by the Kaaba and goes out looking for the Prophet ﷺ, because it's a level of persecution is very high when it comes to the Muslims at this time. And so he is being cautious not to let people know why he is there. Ali radiallahu anhu sees him and invites him to his house and hosts him. And at this time, he doesn't know that he's being hosted by Ali radiallahu anhu. He continues for 3 nights the same action of going to the Kaaba, looking for the Prophet ﷺ, until Ali radiallahu anhu says, like, tell me what it is you're looking for. And he finally tells him, and of course he's in good company. He's in the house of Ali radiallahu anhu, the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. So Ali takes him to the Prophet ﷺ, and Abu Dhar there, he accepts Islam, and he promises not to return. He says, by Allah, I will not return I will not leave Mecca until I go to Masjid al-Haram and declare my shahada in front of the people. And this is basically a death sentence to do this. So the Prophet ﷺ warns him not to do it, but he insists. He says, I have to do it. It's something in my soul to do. And so he goes and he shouts the shahada in front of the Haram, and he's beaten almost to death until Abbas comes and protects him. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, Alam anhaka an i'lan islamika, didn't I prevent you or warn you not to do so, not to advertise your Islam? And he says, Ya Rasulullah, kanat hajatan fi nafsi faqadaytuha, that it was a longing of my soul, it was a need of my soul, and I fulfilled it. And so he doesn't regret his actions one bit. He returns to his tribe and he converts many people from Ghifar to Islam. Third, we talked about Abdullah ibn Maktoum radiallahu anhu. Does anyone remember what Abdullah ibn Maktoum's name means? Abdullah, the son of the mother of the blind person. Abdullah ibn Maktoum radiallahu anhu, he is blind. And he is رجل أعمى أنزل الله في شأنه 16 آية تليت وستظل تتلى ما كر الجديدان. He's a blind man that Allah Ta'ala sent down 16 verses that will be recited to the end of time about him. He was an early convert to Islam in Mecca, and him being blind didn't spare him any punishment. The Quraysh did not care that he was blind. He faced persecution just like everyone else, but he was eager to learn about Islam. The most famous story that we all know about Abdullah ibn Maktoum radiallahu anhu is when the Prophet ﷺ was debating with the chieftains of Quraysh. He's debating with them, Abu Jahl, he's debating with Al-Walid ibn Mughira. He has an audience of them. The outcome is that either they accept Islam or perhaps that they will reduce their harm upon the Muslims. So this is a very important conversation. Abdullah ibn Maktoum comes in the middle of this and asks the Prophet ﷺ to teach him an ayah. And the Prophet ﷺ frowns and turns away. On the Prophet ﷺ's way back to his house after this gathering, he feels the ringing in his head, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down the verses, Abasa wa tawalla an ja'ahu al-a'ma, that he frowned and he turned away when the blind person came to him. SubhanAllah, Abasa wa tawalla are two actions that the blind person can't even see. That you frowned and that you turned away. Abdullah ibn Maktoum cannot even see the frown of the Prophet ﷺ, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saw it, and that's what matters, and that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls out in the Quran. So the Prophet ﷺ treats Abdullah ibn Maktoum with an even higher standard after this, radiallahu anhu. And Abdullah ibn Maktoum radiallahu anhu is one of the people who was sent to Medina with Mus'ab ibn Umayr radiallahu anhu to spread the message. Mus'ab went with Abdullah ibn Maktoum, and so they went spreading the message of Islam to Medina before the Hijrah. After the Hijrah, he became one of the two mu'adhins, him and Bilal, and he would make the adhan for the true time of Fajr when it was Ramadan. He would make two adhans, and he would make the second when it was time of Fajr. And one last note about Abdullah ibn Maktoum radiallahu anhu is that after the battle of Badr, and when the verses came down praising those who fought in the battle and praising the difference between those who fight and did not fight, Abdullah ibn Maktoum, he became upset, became saddened, because he says that if I was able to fight, I would do so. And so he asked the Prophet ﷺ, and he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send down ayat addressing him, addressing people like him who wanted to fight but are unable to. And subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down these ayat, لا يستوي القاعدون من المؤمنين غير أولي الضرر, that except for those who have that need, غير أولي الضرر, people like in the situation of Abdullah ibn Maktoum radiallahu anhu, they are excused. And so his excuse has come down. The ayah he was looking for comes down, but he's still not content. He still doesn't find his soul content and says, you know what? I'll join the jihad anyways. I can be a flag bearer. I can sit in between two men and carry the flag. I can walk in between them. فَأَنَا أَعْمَى لَا أَسْتَطِيعُ الْفِرَارِ, because I'm blind, I'm not capable of fleeing. And so I would be a good candidate to hold a flag. And so he served in all the ghazawat carrying the flag of Islam. And this is because النفوس الكبيرة لا تقنع إلا بكبائر الأمور. A grand soul doesn't settle for less. They don't settle except for anything but the greatest. So even though he had his excuse and he wanted his excuse, he decided to go out to battle anyways, and he dies in the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, in the Muslim conquest of Persia, carrying the flag. He is found dead after that victorious battle, carrying the flag of the Muslims in between his chest. We'll have two more companions. The next is Majza'a ibn Thawr al-Sadusi radiallahu anhu. Majza'a was an amazing warrior. Remember how many victories he had in duels? It's an easy number to guess. How many battles did he win in duels, one-on-one battles? When they bring two people to fight at the start of the army, how many victories did he have? Majza'a ibn Thawr al-Sadusi. It's an easy number. Even if you didn't know the question, you could guess it. 100. Over 100 duels. He won over 100 duels. So after the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, the beginning, the Persian conquest, Umar radiallahu anhu, he sends Abu Musa al-Ash'ari to meet with the Muslims in Al-Basra and to continue to eastwards to Al-Ahwaz to pursue the remaining Persian generals. This one was Hormuzan. And so in his letter, he instructs Abu Musa to include Majza in his army. And so the Muslims pursue Hormuzan until they reach the fortress city of Tustar. And the start of this siege is that the city is surrounded by water and drawbridges. And so the Muslims lay siege to the city for 18 months because they cannot cross the water. And over this period of 18 months, every week, almost every week, there would be a battle where the Persians would come out and there would be a little skirmish. And as a tradition, you would send out a warrior to fight another warrior, right? Majza ibn Thawr al-Sadusi for 18 months straight would always be the warrior who goes out to the front. The Persians would send someone and he would kill them. For 18 months in a row. Imagine every single week, Majza comes out and kills your warrior. Majza comes out and kills your warrior. And so they were terrified of him. And eventually, the Persians were pushed back so hard in one of these skirmishes, they left their bridges, the Muslims crossed in. The second challenge now was how do they deal with the fortress walls? And the Persians are volleying arrows at the Muslims, throwing down these molten hot hooks that would be burning hot and hook onto you, and they would pull you up and you would die as you're being pulled up the fortress walls. Does anyone remember another companion we covered who was caught by this hook? And he was saved by his brother. That is Anas ibn Malik al-Ansari was caught by one of these hooks, and his brother Al-Bara ibn Malik jumps and removes this hook from Anas ibn Malik and suffers an injury from the burning of the hook and eventually dies and succumbs to the injury. And so the last story about Majza is how his heroics overcame these fortress walls. And so an arrow flies in front of Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, and he opens it and reads it, and it's a letter from someone within the fortress walls who has beef with Hormuzan. He's a Persian who has suffered under the oppression of Hormuzan, and he trusts the Muslim more. He says in his letter that he trusts the Muslims. And so he says, I can tell you a way to get into the city. So he comes out at night, and he explains to the Muslims that there's an underwater passageway that you can use that's partially underwater to enter the city. And so Abu Musa sends Majza ibn Thawr with him to navigate this passageway and enter the city. So Majza navigates it, enters the city, memorizes the route, and comes back. And the next day, he goes with 300 soldiers into this passageway during the night to sneak into the fortress walls and open the gates from the inside. 300 people started entering the tunnel, only 80 survived to the other side. Because it's a dangerous, narrow tunnel with water that would submerge you with various different turns where you can get lost. And so 220 people died even just making this 2-hour journey through the tunnel. But the 80 that survived defeated the enemy forces, opened the gates, and the Muslims flooded in and took over the fortress city of Tustar. Majza radiallahu anhu, he dies fighting against Hormuzan. He dies fighting against Hormuzan. I said two more, but I'll do one more because of time. Usayd ibn al-Hudayr radiallahu anhu is the next companion we covered in that order. Usayd ibn al-Hudayr radiallahu anhu was a companion who, we'll start with the story of how he accepted Islam. Mus'ab ibn Umair was the ambassador sent to Medina calling people to Islam. And he would stay at the house, the center of the da'wah was at the house of As'ad ibn Zurara radiallahu anhu. And so these two, Mus'ab and As'ad, were traveling around Medina spreading the da'wah, and they go to the tribes of Usaid. They go to the orchards belonging to his tribe. And when Usaid hears about them calling to Islam in his tribe, he's furious and he's sent to scare them away. So he comes to them with his lance and says, if you have any value for your lives, then you'll leave these towns. And Mus'ab was a very eloquent, smart and charming person. And he said, oh, chieftain of your tribe, shall I not tell you something better than that? And so Usaid, he listens, and Mus'ab says, sit down and listen. If you're pleased with what we say, you accept it. And if you're not pleased, we'll leave and you'll never see us again. And so Usaid accepts this deal. He sits down, and the second he hears the Quran, he falls in love with it. He says, how beautiful are these words? He asks how to accept Islam, and he accepts Islam. And it was a really great person to be accepting Islam. He was literate, one of the few people who knew how to read and write. He was known by the nickname of Al-Kamil by his people because he was literate, a warrior, a poet. He had everything you could want, all the good attributes. And he was very in love with the Quran and would recite it with a beautiful voice. The companions would sneak to listen to his beautiful recitation. And not only the companions, but even the angels. He was reciting one night at night, and every time he recited, his horse would go crazy. And every time he stopped, his horse would stop going crazy. And this kept continuing until he stopped reciting. And then he looks up in the sky and sees something that looks like a cloud covered with lanterns floating up into the sky. And he tells the Prophet ﷺ about what he saw. The Prophet ﷺ says, تِلْكَ الْمَلَائِكَةُ كَانَتْ تَسْتَمِعُ لَكَ يَا أُسَيْدِ. This was the angels listening to you, Ya Usaid. That's how beautiful his recitation was. Usaid radiallahu anhu loved the Prophet ﷺ so much. And he was a joking, funny, intelligent person, as we said. And so once he was telling funny stories to the companions, they were laughing. And the Prophet ﷺ laughed and poked him approvingly, you know, when you're laughing and you poke somebody. And so Usaid jokes and says, you hurt me. And so Prophet ﷺ says, you can take revenge and poke me back. Usaid says, I was wearing a shirt where you poked me. I was not wearing a shirt where you poked me. And so the Prophet ﷺ lifts his shirt, and Usaid comes and kisses the side of the Prophet ﷺ and says, بِأَبِي أَنْتَ وَأُمِّي يَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ إِنَّهَا لَبُغْيَةٌ كُنْتُ أَتَمَنَّاهَا مُنْذُ عَرَفْتُكَ وَقَدْ بَلَغْتُهَا الْآنَ. That by my that I would sacrifice my mother and my father for you, O Rasulullah. This was a wish that I had from the day that I met you, and I was able to fulfill it. This is the love that the companions had for the Prophet ﷺ. Inshallah, next week we'll continue with the quick review of Abdullah ibn Abbas' story radiallahu anhu, and then add a new story which is Suhaib al-Rumi radiallahu anhu. May Allah Ta'ala allow us to benefit and understand and remember these stories. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا. اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. اللهم يا مصرف القلوب صرف قلوبنا على طاعتك. اللهم اجعل القرآن ربيع قلوبنا وذهاب همومنا وجلاء أحزاننا. اللهم علمنا منه ما جهلنا وذكرنا منه ما نسينا وارزقنا تلاوته وحفظه في آناء الليل وأطراف النهار. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم اشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين وارحم موتانا وموتى المسلمين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين في كل مكان، وانصر من نصر دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم واجعلنا منهم، واخذل من خذل دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا تجعلنا منهم. اللهم عليك بالظالمين ومن والاهم، اللهم احصهم عددا واقتلهم بددا ولا تغادر منهم احدا. وصل اللهم على